You can't really see these glasses. They're copper. They're copper in color. I'm wearing a black dress. It's actually a black corduroy dress. It's almost full length. It has long sleeves. It buttons up. I like it. It's modest. I feel like it's the kind of dress that you might wear if you were maybe from a different time period. Maybe if you were in some sort of instructional role. You know, it's part of my cosmos, actually. Before they inverted my house, my cosmos, they looked like a house, actually. Before they inverted my natal chart and tried to work these scenarios based on me being the inverse of the actual time I was born. Almost as if they were locating my powerhouses in the other hemisphere. But for the time that I was actually born, the place I was actually born, the chart looks like a house. Four corners, and then there's the top. It's very symmetrical. There's some distension on the either side of the house, right? Almost as if it has a slanted roof, but the dome is perfect. And right at the top of my dome is my Saturn, which is in the house of higher education. Ironic, isn't it? I never got to finish college, right? You know, when they inverted the house, my Saturn was somewhere else. And planets that were not supposed to be in the house of primary education ended up in the house of primary education. It's not where they were supposed to be. And it wasn't where I was supposed to be. Not like that, right? At some point in time, I got my long form birth certificate. I never had a long form birth certificate of my own. My mother kept that. But I got my own official long form birth certificate, and it confirmed the time I was born, the place I was born, these various important matters. And I say this now because I'm wearing the copper glasses with the black dress, and I'm in Dallas, and it's very profound. Because I spent several months sleeping at Grassy Knoll overnight. I had a suitcase, got stolen once, along with a pair of glasses I had that were also copper, right? If I woke up in the morning as I was packing up to leave before it got too early or got too late and people started going back and forth for work, I could look through the monument. I could see them in the finishing stages of the construction of the Holocaust Museum down the street. This is important. Have you ever seen it? It's got a copper top. You know how strange it is? You ever heard about the migration in North America from the Copper Age? It makes you think differently about public education. I have no problem wearing these two together. I think I've earned it. But I want to tell you a story. A happy story. I hope it gets happier. Shortly after I came back from Honduras in 2015, I was writing and I was trying to do an article. There were two things I wanted to talk about and write about. And one of those things involved talking with a particular group of people. At some point, they had asked me to come and to do a presentation about my travels. And I did. But at that time, I also met somebody who had been a friend of mine from before I'd left. And he told me, I'd been talking to him about my disappointment with the economy. And he told me he knew some people that were getting together and they were having a presentation at the university in San Francisco about a different kind of economy that they were working to build. And that some of them had been a part of a program for transitions, people that had had an intersection with the criminal justice system, and that there was a presentation at the university, and he told me about it, and I went. And I listened to the presentation. They had several speakers. There were people that were in the audience there, and I was dumbfounded. I was so happy. I was very, very happy the way that they had talked about how they were going to be organizing these alternative understandings of currency. And one of the things that was fascinating was their time labor understanding that there were certain things that even while you were inside engaged in some program of rehabilitation, you could do things to accrue a kind of credit, and then that credit could be based upon your investment of time. It could actually give you a credit unit, and you could use that credit unit uh, either while you were there or even after you got out to actually provide a sort of possibility to go to college, or to go to the community college, or to go to some sort of other manner, and it would actually provide a means by which to get you what you would need to be able to make a transition into the economy that was coming up. And not only that, there were other things that they talked about as being a sort of alternative to actual paper money, and the way that they were going to operationalize it. And I was very happy to hear this because it was actually exactly the kind of thing I'd been hoping to learn about, this understanding of how to be able to work with time as a contribution of value, and that the contribution of value could translate or could find a way to yield something that would give you actual material benefit that you could use to improve your life or improve your community. Now, one could say that, there is something specific about the fact that this was something I was introduced to through a program concerning former offenders, and I actually think it, under the context, was actually pretty fitting, right? Because of the fact that this is how they understood their reconceptualization of their time and what it meant to engage in all of the things that came with whatever the proceeding was. But specifically, that they had themselves come up with this as a group, and that this was something that they were going to be able to use to organize their lives and to talk to people. And one of the things that's very important is something we don't really talk about in this country very frequently, which is how in the last 10 years there has been almost a flip in a lot of people's lives. I thought it was just me, but it wasn't just me. Lots and lots and lots and lots of people have had what used to be the life they had before the onset of the Affordable Care Act alienated from them in some way, shape, or form. And then there's another life they're set up for, or there's another life they're attracted to, or another life they come into, right? And the means by which this has been effectuated, the intents behind it, the purposes, the processes, have, if you know, in large part in many places, also correlated with what has been a transition, including in the civil service sector, of people that were career employees at civil service sector jobs throughout the country in different cities, coming up to that threshold where a lot of people were supposed to retire. And so lots of civil services in a variety of different sectors in many cities throughout the country were in a situation where they were going to need to hire new workers and trade new workers in order to fill roles that were going to be aged out, as they say. And part of that is going to be talking about, and it was necessarily going to have to deal with, well, what is going to be the transition, who and what is going to qualify for these jobs, how are they going to be able to get the sort of legacy bridge. And not only that, then you've got many people that are going to be aging out and retiring and expecting to have a certain kind of benefit associated with their retirement based on having spent the entirety of their professional life in the course of trying to seek those retirement benefits, right? I mean, some people knew about this. And so it's absolutely fitting that people that are in a situation where they are having an intersection with the institutions of this country, including one of the largest employers of civil service workers in the state of California, right? When it comes to state pension benefits, who are the primary beneficiaries of public pension benefits in the state of California? Anybody know? Oh, wait a second. If you're a former offender or you're an offender in jail, you're not a part of their retirement system, or are you? Right? Yeah. Well, I mean, if you've spent 5 years without a job because somehow it was determined that you were supposed to be doing some other kind of alternative service when it comes to meeting pension obligation, not necessarily in a effort to accrue pension benefits for yourself while you're paying into a system, paying out other benefit earners that have retired, right? You might want to be thinking about how are you going to understand your time served as having some sort of value that is something you can invest in your community and with your community, and that will set something in motion and set up some process whereby when you get to their age, well, why am I not supposed to be in a situation where I'm thinking about my retirement system benefit potential outside of the context of just being used for public debt service that ends up paying a public employee's pension benefits? I mean, these things make sense. And somebody took the time to think about a variety of different things that were of absolute material interest to them personally at the time, and had a very substantial possibility for really speaking to the needs that other people had, including me. Now, at the time, I had a particular, shall we say, grounding in what my self interest was. It was kind of altruistic, right? Kind of ideological, I suppose you could say. I had, as a matter of principle, a very strong critique of the money system in the United States, including the manner in which the dollar in the United States is pegged to the various kinds of commodities in the manner it is, particularly gas and oil. And an understanding that there at that time was discussion in other countries, a very significant discussion in other countries about a potential for a public banking system, and that there were all these concerns about what was BRICS. What's BRICS? Anybody remember what BRICS was? And there was this talk about it, and when I'd been outside the country, they had talked about it. It was different than what you heard inside the United States. So there's these concepts of the possibility for digital currency. Anybody remember that thing in Ecuador before the earthquake? And so all these things, at least at the time, these were already things that were on the table, so to speak, in other places. These were things that other people were discussing and contemplating as part of their national paradigm or their international relations. And something called Bitcoin might come up, especially if you've been hit with a ransomware attack and nobody's ever told you what that was or how to deal with it if it happens to you, right? So these were the things that were going on in the background or in the context of me seeking out any information and then being told, well, here's this event that's happening. And that happened. And I remember I went to the event and I listened. And it was kind of difficult first, to be honest with you. Listening to some people talk, the resonance. See, I understand it now. Their attenuation was very different than my attenuation. And the background running concurrent to what they were actually doing literally was very different than the background running concurrent to what I was doing. And in some ways adversarial. So you had to get through a lot of static, and there was a lot of concurrent transactional processes going on that were compressed, but because of the attenuation they had versus the attenuation I had, there was some disaggregation of the compressed bandwidth. So you had to really focus on the conversation. And you had to focus on what they were saying and really, hold, course with focusing on what they were saying in regards to all the stuff that was going on in their background that you may be conscious of. Now, they did not tell me if anything, they were conscious of that might be going on in their resonance with understanding that something similar was happening to me. But in that process, I learned a great deal about the different people I got to speak with. And it was fascinating, but it was also as challenging as it was, because it was very challenging, right? It's very challenging to be talking to somebody and then to not have the technical know-how to understand what's going on, but to be able to observe things that are going on and then have things that you might be querying while you're making observations confirmed when they respond directly to what your unspoken query is, right? It's very easy, actually, if you're authentic, to talk about these things. And it's also very, very, very valuable. The question then becomes, well, who has the capacity to sustain a conversation of that sort? And when I was there with them, all of them did. And so I was very encouraged. I took notes. I took a lot of notes. And I had a notebook, I took notes, and then after they left, and, I'm sitting there for a second, and I'm just thinking, wow, did that really just happen? Wow. And then, some other students came in, Or students at the university. One of them had been a member of the discussion, and they said, and we had a discussion about something I hadn't talked about for a very long time. The kind of person I used to be before I went to San Francisco. The things I was interested in. The reference points I had. Who I was before I went to San Francisco, and then was engaged in one of those processes that people had been engaged in 2010, where events in their lives were really, really significantly changing, and it was almost like a 180-degree turn occurred that put them on a completely different trajectory than what they had been on before. But here I am in this room with these young men in college, and I'm having this conversation about international events, about the specifics of their faith praxis versus their very materialist understanding, very high level political concepts. We were talking like real human beings. So I was very inspired. And lo and behold, I go back to where I'd been before, what had been my home. And I go into the place that you could have, it was like Cheers there. Anybody ever see that that show, Cheers? About the bar. There's this bar on the island. And I go in, and I'm wearing these earrings. See, I'd met this girl, this woman about my age. And not so ironically, she had very copper red hair. She was beautiful. It was a strange thing. It was like some goddess from some myth. I think that I might have known her. I might have known her spirit way back in the day. I had never met her before, and we were talking that day. And she told me about herself, and her background was a lot like mine. Where she came from, who her people were. And it was strange, because until then, I hadn't really met another woman that reminded me of where I understood I came from. It was like this beautiful goddess. I just saw her. And she had these earrings on. I noticed them. And she's like, you know what? I'm going to give these to you. And I'm like, what? She's like, I'm going to give these to you. I'm like, no, here. And she took them off. And they were these white abalone shell, this white circle, like the full moon. And she gave them to me. She said that I was supposed to have them. I'd never worn them before that day, but I was wearing them that night. See, I want to tell you the rest of the story. But not yet. Not because I want to cut it off, but because it's sacred.